Okay.
Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar
I don't
la
know what
mesa
happened
redonda,
today.
The Round Table, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de
It's
política, educación y
ridiculous.
otros temas, locales, regionales y mundiales, por USA la Radio.
Yeah. Señores oyentes de USA la Media, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Round Table desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero y nuestra invitada especial, Karis Painter. Good morning, buenos días. Karis.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi. Did you fall asleep?
I was looking up the COVID numbers in Argentina compared to here, so I got
True. Yeah.
distracted.
Could you see that I haven't been?
I could. It is 80. So I believe Argentina's population is 45 million, and they've had 80,000 cases and 1,500 deaths is what I just turned off that page.
I have some updates here. Argentina, 80,447. And 1,582 people have died. 28,531 have recovered. So like 1/4 of the cases recovered quickly. I don't know what happened to the other numbers. If there are 80,000 cases, they're still current, I guess. I don't know.
That statistic I would probably want to know more about overall.
Yeah,
what does not recovered mean?
I don't know. The U.S. 3 million. So now we have a record number, more than anybody. 3,041,000. 132,000 people have died, and 1,325 have recovered. Yeah.
Are you able to see Florida's numbers? Because that is an interesting.
Yeah, no, but I will look for it later. But I had some other numbers here. Colombia has 120,000 cases in Colombia for COVID, and 4,210 have died. So, what a way to start with this. Huh?
It's a little crazy. So I came back a week and a half ago, landed in Miami, spent a few days in Miami. And initially I was very amazed. The airport was very quiet. People were wearing masks. There were no taxis, which was normally a very busy area coming off. I believe it was Terminal D. And then in the area I was in Miami, Coconut Grove, people were not I would say maybe 75% of people outside were not wearing masks. It was significantly quieter, a lot less people out, but than previous times I had been in that area. But I was amazed that people were not wearing masks to the degree that they were in Argentina. Everybody in Buenos Aires that I came across was wearing a mask.
So Argentina is doing well then, as far as dealing with the problem.
Absolutely, and I think what jumps out, and this has been said on the news here and the news overseas, is that this idea in America that we don't have to follow the rules, that there's American exceptionalism, the lack of community and probably empathy for caring about those that we've never come in contact with is vibrant and alive in the United States, where in Argentina there definitely was a feeling in Buenos Aires of you take care of your neighbors.
So you want to tell us when did you go to Buenos Aires?
I went in the beginning of February. And then I remember having a coffee outside with a friend, someone I had met, and we were saying, I think there's only 8 cases here, or one person was diagnosed who came from overseas. And we were seeing the numbers in Italy and Spain increase. thinking Argentina was so far away and so isolated. And now looking at the numbers and looking at how much the world has changed in the last, 4 months, 5 months, almost 6 months, is pretty incredible. So they went on lockdown March 19th, the evening of March 19th, and they just returned to their phase 1, at least in Buenos Aires, of almost everything being closed down.
So phase 1 is what allowed you to fly back.
So I want to say maybe beginning of April, all commercial flights to and from Argentina were banned, or there were no selling of flights. There were no until September 1st. So the only way to get back into the country if you're Argentine from overseas or leave, in my case, was on these repatriation flights. So the U.S. government, the embassy in Buenos Aires, corresponds with a few airlines to see if they can get these flights together, and they're very expensive. For someone to understand, one of the airlines, Eastern Airlines, which no one's really ever heard of, was bringing empty planes from Miami to Buenos Aires, and then you'd pay for your flight back. So since the plane was empty coming in, the flights were $1,800 one way from Buenos Aires to Miami.
Wow.
And then there were a couple other airlines that were just getting there. LATAM had a couple flights from Buenos Aires to Chile. And then from Chile, you could get a cheaper flight to the United States. But LATAM, similar to Avianca, pulled out of Argentina's market. So they're no longer operating.
And Avianca, as I recall, declared bankruptcy a while back. So I don't know. I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah.
I have to find out with Avianca.
So I ended up taking an Aerolíneas Argentina flight, which is their national airline, which is now really the only airline operating within the country once commercial flights resume in, they say, September. Who knows? Yeah, so most of the people on my plane, you had to either be a U.S. citizen or on your way to U.S. citizenship.
So you arrived in Buenos Aires in February. Is that their summer?
Yes. So it was very hot. The clothes I had taken were summer clothes, and when I left, it was winter, but it was becoming winter, the end of fall, a pretty mild winter. And I have to say, I missed the weather a little bit. So hot here.
You miss the weather from Buenos Aires? Yeah.
The fall and the upcoming winter, because it's very, it's mild. It's in Fahrenheit here. Maybe the coldest day that I had been there in June was 50 something degrees.
So you were in Buenos Aires in February, and what is the reason you traveled to Argentina?
Oh, it's a little complicated.
You were getting married?
No, the plan was not to stay long term. It was a short term trip, and then the quarantine happened. So I didn't even have that much stuff. I've been wearing most of the same clothes my time there.
Oh, could you go shopping?
We could go shopping, I guess, before the quarantine, but then once the quarantine happened, clothing stores didn't open until May, and then you could just look in the window and point to things. So I never bought any more clothes.
So on a day-to-day, how did you buy groceries?
Since I'm vegan, most of the food I ate, I would get at a market. They still had wonderful fresh fruits and vegetables.
You're in Argentina. Argentina is famous for beef.
It is, which was interesting seeing these very famous steakhouses. Some go out of business, but almost completely shut down because most people probably do not want to get a steak as takeout. And it was the experience. I don't know if you've ever been to Argentina, but you order a steak and they'll bring out 5 condiments and bread and all these things.
Yeah, no, I have not been to Argentina, but I have been to Malbec here
Oh,
in Philly, and it's a little taste of Argentina.
yeah. Or
That's on my list of things to do, Argentina.
definitely, probably now is not the best time or the next couple months.
Not until we have a vaccine.
No, they don't want any other people in the country
I,
anyway.
well, nobody wants anybody from the U.S. right now.
This is very true. And I actually have a friend in Argentina who is thinking of going to another country, either in Europe or Asia, not now, but in upcoming months. And she said she doesn't want to come back to the US because once she lands on US soil, nobody's going to want her to enter the country.
Yeah, I mean, our numbers are amazing. Surprisingly high, because I mean we should be doing better with this. So we have the United States have 3,041,132,993 people have died, and 1,325,000 have recovered. Those are U.S. numbers.
And I think the scary thing about just looking at the numbers, I was listening to Ron DeSantis. Is that his DeSantis, the governor of Florida, yesterday,
Yes.
talking about how now the average age in Florida is extremely young. And one of the doctors came on the air and said he had patients that were 21, 24, etc. And DeSantis said that the number of deaths is much lower. And yes, this is true, especially with younger patients. They say they tend to recover more quickly, but we still don't know what happens to people's lungs permanently or over the next year, that there's still so many unknowns.
Right.
So even though the deaths may seem lower than they were in April, it's a horrible argument to have in your head of I'm young, I'm fit, I'll be okay. It's just a virus when nobody knows.
Well, that's one of the concerns. The remnants on the lungs. What's going to happen? You might recover from COVID, but what are the consequences? I think there's a name for that. For what happens to you after an illness like this. Anyway, but you're right. Younger people, the average used to be 60 something, and now the average is 30 something, because so many people in their 20s have caught it, and they are not innocent. I mean, they caught it for a reason. They abused immediately. They thought they were immune, and they abused that sort of privilege of immunity, and all of a sudden they're catching it.
Yes, and from what I've read and seen in my short time in Florida, that the desire for human connection and the desire to go out and have this so-called regular life, despite there being a global pandemic with a virus that we don't know everything about, it just shows that people don't care. And there's such a disconnect between what you think could happen and your need to party.
Right.
Just scary.
Okay, let's go back to Buenos Aires, because I want to find out, like, I don't know how many of our listeners have ever been to Argentina. So how many times have you been to Argentina?
That was my 6th trip over probably 10 years. So the past couple of years, I've been going for almost a month or less the past couple of years to Buenos Aires.
Uh-huh. And you have only been in Buenos Aires? Have you visited other parts of Argentina?
I have only been to one other city outside of Argentina, and I was very excited on this trip to potentially go a little farther out, especially towards the border with Bolivia or Chile, but that didn't happen.
No? Yeah, because for obvious reasons. So you've been there 6 times. What is your favorite part of Buenos Aires?
I think what jumps out to me is the culture of music, dancing, the arts are alive and it's integrated in their economic system, which they have a huge informal economy like many countries in South America and also other emerging economies that you're an artist and so you play at one venue on a Monday night, you'll play at a different venue on another night, you offer classes. And that was something that I participated in a lot, attending live music shows, taking classes, and that has come to a 100% stop with the exception of online Zoom classes.
Yeah, the tango, is that the main reason you went to Argentina?
Tango was a huge part of it, and I recently started studying in the past year folklore dancing. So folklore dancing is similar to any folk dance in any country, that it's mostly practiced outside of the big cities, outside Buenos Aires. And I was learning to play the drum as well.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Any other instruments you play?
No, when I was younger, I studied the piano and saxophone.
Wow. Such talent. But you also do yoga?
I do. And that I started doing more given the quarantine because it was a solitary activity, could be done at home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you spent time in Buenos Aires. There's a famous street there that we're always talking about Broad Street as a big street. Mm. They have an actual huge avenue in Buenos Aires, which is the 9 de Julio.
Oh, right? Yes. Which is maybe 8 lanes or more. Maybe it's 8 lanes on one side.
I think it's a lot more than that. It's something like that. It's ridiculous. How long does it take to cross that street?
It takes several lights. Even to cross I think it's every 4 lanes, there is a light and a little median, and it takes a while. And especially when it's hot outside, you notice how uncomfortable it is. And then when it's raining, which I actually did when I was there this last trip, because the drainage system on that street is not amazing, and you're waiting on a little median and the cars come by, you will be soaked.
There you are.
It's awful.
Unexpected. So you were there for all this time. So besides, as you say, you were doing video conferencing. Did you read? What do you like to read?
I do read. I'm an avid nonfiction reader. And recently I've been reading a lot of Daniel Pink's books.
Daniel Pink. Okay.
Yes. And I will give...
I don't know.
He writes on, I'm going to say, some pop culture communication issues. I will give a shout out to the Philadelphia Public Library because I have a Kindle and you can order books, check out books from Philadelphia's library. I don't know why I did that in air quotes. And get it delivered to your Kindle. I requested Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and I was number 60 in the hold list. And I just got a notice that I can now download it on my Kindle. Wow. Philadelphia Public Library. Huh? Yes.
Wow. So what else do you read?
I became an avid reader of Argentine news, and I learned that different papers were slanted different ways. So some of the ones that supported the president, which would be a more left-leaning paper or news site, would always start with the numbers of COVID cases, whereas the other ones might be a little more critical of the policies that were in place, like the strict quarantine.
So people are not all that happy with that, right?
It was same thing here. I think it was interesting seeing that most people felt that the quarantine and the measures being done were to protect the people and they were willing to not go out and have their life restricted in ways that we have experienced here. But then there were also sides in business and people who also were extremely poor that would sell avocados in the street, that while they understood the quarantine restrictions, without money to buy food, they have no food. The social system is not the same as it is here. And I think Al Jazeera had an article today about the level of poverty and how it's surged in Argentina. The before the pandemic, I believe 40% of children were living in poverty, and that number has just grown.
It's amazing. Argentina, at the beginning of the 20th century, was one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
It was. I believe it was one of the top 5, in fact. And then I'm not a political Argentine junkie, but I believe with Peronism and post World War II, some of that changed.
Yes, dictatorship, corruption at all levels, etc. That brought an end to Argentine wealth. It's a shame. Buenos Aires, the capital, still has the remnants of having been a magnificent city that attracted immigrants from all over the world. And the Italians arrived in droves. So I know that much about Argentina, that there's a great number of Italian immigrants.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you bring that up, because Italy and Spain were the 2 countries that people looked to in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, of the quarantine, looking at the numbers, looking at what Italy and Spain were doing, because relatives were from there.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think once they saw that those countries began to open up, Argentina began to do the same, and a totally different outcome, because Europe, again, has a much better social system than most Latin American countries.
Yeah, actually, Italy had like very little, if not zero people dying. Now, Italy is one of the countries that recovered from this. Spain also has lowered that curve, but we are going in the opposite direction. We're now, especially Houston, Florida, Houston, California, we are now at the point where Italy was 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
And from what I have read and what I saw in Miami, I believe a lot of it is due to the restaurants and bars being open. People start drinking. Their judgment changes. I also don't fully understand the idea of you're wearing a mask, but when you're eating and drinking, you lower the mask to eat and drink. But then people just kind of keep it off or keep it down, and you're still in this enclosed space.
Dr. Fauci says this is not a second wave. He's saying we just never left the wave, and we're getting worse. Each day it gets worse than the one before.
Absolutely. And at this point, I mean, whether it's a second wave, first wave, 8th wave, the fact is this is a very highly contagious virus that we don't have all the information about, because we're learning every day. And why, I guess my question is, why take the risk?
Why take the risk? But people do. I do not understand that. People do take a risk. And as we saw, you mentioned Florida, where the median age of people dying now has been lowered.
Right.
But here are 3 things that I was listening to Fauci and others. Dr. Fauci, by the way, became the most credible spokesman for the U.S. government.
Wow.
Because we know we cannot trust the president.
Yeah. And I love the way that Dr. Fauci crafts his message and answers even some of the tough questions. I saw some of his answers. I think it was by members of Congress when he was testifying. And I want to say it was Rand Paul was saying, you want to close this, you want to cancel this, you want to cancel that. And Dr. Fauci came back and said, I am speaking from the facts of being a medical doctor, scientist, and this is how the virus is spread. And he said, I don't know about baseball. I'm not making choices about baseball. I'm talking about how the virus is spread. And I think that's a great way to share your expertise is I'm speaking from the facts.
That's right. So, this morning he said there are three things the government should be doing right now. And one of them is the obvious one that we have mentioned already, enforcing masks.
Oh.
And people say, oh, well, how do you enforce that? Well, they did it for smoking. So we can do the same thing. A fine if you not wearing your mask, and especially you should not be able to go into any establishment without a mask, because indoors is easier to communicate this virus.
Right.
So
I assume if it's a private business, they can, and I saw this in Miami, they would have a sign that says you have to wear a mask when you come in, just like the signage before of no shirt, no shoes, no service.
Right. But, so they should do that. And governors, Murphy from New Jersey and Mayor de Blasio in New York, no indoor dining. That's what they have to do. Forbid that. And that's very tough to do right now at this point, because they already allowed many restaurants to open. And then number three, this is where the governors come in more heavily. Deploy all assets available to and up to, including the National Guard.
Yeah, so, I don't know about that one. I don't know how that will solve things.
What they do, well, no, I mean, like they enlisted a military a ship that they conscripted to turn into a hospital. That's one way the military can help. They have many ships, the Navy, that can contribute to this. So, because they're in Houston right now, the hospitals are at a maximum. So they have reached a level where they are in crisis. And that's what I know. You're a green person and all that stuff, and you don't like the military and all that. But in this case, they will be doing it for a good cause.
I think my hesitation with saying anything about the military's uses, I think we saw what the president used the military for, to tear gas protesters so that he could have a photo op with an upside down Bible outside of a church. That would be one of my concerns, is how is the military being used? The thing that I love about the military is a perfect example of people coming together under leadership, following directions for the better cause of their team and for the country. And that members of the military follow directions, follow the chain of command. They're all wearing uniforms. They follow directions. And that is the exact opposite of what people are doing right now with regard to wearing a mask. And I think the issue with the mask, from what I've heard and read of people who don't want to wear a mask, is that they don't see their responsibility as individuals contributing to the greater good of society. And that there's also the issue, especially with men, of this idea of being not manly, or nobody's telling me what to do, which I see as an issue of protection. As a single person, if you're not wearing a mask, what else do you not wear? What other rules do you not follow? What other things do you not protect yourself against? It seems very strange, and if not some kind of delusional thinking. Are these the same people that don't wear seatbelts? Are these the same people that don't think traffic lights apply to them? It's like we've all adopted this mafiosa mentality of the rules don't apply to me.
You are so right. There was, in fact, our friend Iris Violeta sent me a clip of somebody Paul Harvey, who was a TV personality, who spoke about that a long time ago, like 50 years ago, and saying that this was the future if we didn't take care of things, that people act irresponsibly in all manners, and crime would increase, and there would not be any respect for law, and so on. And that this is a little bit of where we are. A sense of instability right now, and unfortunately, our president sort of thrives on that.
It's so interesting, the things that we choose. I would love to be a sociologist or a organizational psychologist right now, studying the human behavior of people.
It's never too late, Karis. You have done everything. Come on.
But it's fascinating to think. For most of us throughout society, we follow the rules. There's a stop sign, we stop, with the exception of, say, Argentina and many other countries. When we go to the airport, there are lines. We stand in lines. When we go into a store, we don't just put everything in our bag and walk out. That when we go into a restaurant, we wait for the host to seat us. That we follow rules knowing fully well that we could just sit in any booth. But this is how the business runs, and we follow those rules. I'm going to be a little dramatic. When you're in a relationship, there's certain rules that you follow. We learned, especially being a child of the 80s, that you use protection when you're in a sexual relationship, that this is something that's done for both parties. And for some reason, now that there's a pandemic with a virus we don't know everything about, but we do know that wearing a mask is a way of protecting ourselves and others, some people just, I don't want to wear the mask, which is interesting because they don't want to use protection. And yet the same people will say, I need a gun for protection. I knew you were going to laugh at that.
It's probably the same people. Yeah, but here the consequences of this lack of proper behavior. I don't know if it was Fauci or another Dr. Gupta, who appeared also on CNN, who said that hospitalizations will increase, could reach 15,000 a day. Imagine that. Imagine that crisis in our hospitals. How do we deal with that?
It's wild, because we can't stay far apart, because we can't stay out of bars. And I'll tell you one thing that I saw in Miami was that the bars had closed on that. Was it 2 Fridays ago? Mm-hmm. The bars had closed. But if they sold French fries, they weren't considered a bar. They were considered a restaurant. So people would go to these bars, and they forced some people to order food. They said, you have to order food or else we will be shut down. And so people were ordering snacks. This was specifically, I will say, in Miami Beach area, that they didn't want, because that was the only way the business could stay in business. And it's because we just can't see this for what it is right now, and doing our part.
That's right. And so because now it's each individual's responsibility. You cannot delegate this to the government. So the government has to do everything. No, you have to do as an individual.
Yes, but I will also say that there is a need for leadership, and there's a need for great messaging. I will go back to all the public service announcements as a child that I remember sitting in these assemblies. Just say no, stop, drop, and roll. Only you can prevent forest fires. I mean, growing up in the Philadelphia area, and you're 7, they're like, only you can prevent forest fires. And we would sit there and go, okay, we're going to do that. And we were 7 living in a house. But at the same time, we learned all of that messaging because it was so strong. This is your brain on drugs. I had no idea what fried eggs meant about anything, but they told us to just say no, and you didn't want to be the fried eggs. And I think, what if that messaging had the same strength and oomph about wearing a mask. I believe New York State commissioned public service announcements on wearing a mask, and that one, you don't want to be that guy. But for some people, they don't care. I'll bring this up about the state of Pennsylvania as well. You don't have to wear a motorcycle helmet. You don't have to wear a helmet when you're riding a motorcycle.
That's ridiculous.
What is that about? And in fact, I actually looked this up this morning. It says a helmet is required for anyone under the age of 21 and who doesn't have a motorcycle license. Instead of saying a helmet is not required unless you're under 21 and you don't have a motorcycle helmet. So even the language that we speak about things is a little twisted. But why are helmets not required in the state of Pennsylvania? And underneath it, it says helmets have been known to significantly reduce head and neck injuries.
Right. And we know the consequences of not wearing a helmet if you have an accident.
Can you imagine if we went to the dentist or the doctor and the doctors were not required to wash their hands between patients or use...
They were optional. It's optional.
And they were seeing one patient who had known diseases, and then they came into your room and they're like, it's optional in the state of Pennsylvania to wash our hands. Would you continue to see that doctor?
No.
No.
I will go to another state. Yeah, well, look, and all this leads to our behavior in society, and it leads to crime. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you saw the results of the recent weekend shootings in Philadelphia. 23 people were shot in a single day. Philadelphia's gun violence epidemic reached alarming heights on Sunday as 23 people were shot across the city, most in a single day since at least 2013. 6 of the victims, including a 6-year-old boy who police believe was mistakenly shot by a 5-year-old boy inside the Upper Homesford. So it's all tragic. The abundance of guns. That's another. You and I could spend another hour with the whole thing about gun control. And why don't we have it?
Well,
I think going back to the issue of crime, and again, I'm not a criminologist or a crime sociologist, but people have been inside for months. School has not been the same for students who are online. The inequity of students who have computers, don't have computers. The parents work from home. The parents can't work from home. And the actual lack of community activities right now. Many of those, many people in neighborhoods, especially youth, would be involved in summer camps or youth programs.
Right.
And I assume that's not going on now.
No, it's not going on. No, the city pools are not open, obviously, for good reason. And so that's what we have, the consequence of all this. I think people have been locked up for so long, and I think this sudden explosion of violence has roots in that. So far in 2020, at least 888 people have been shot in Philly. Imagine that. Imagine that in a country like Great Britain, where 1 or 2 crimes will cause alarm. We have 888 in one city.
So I think, again, that goes back to we can do individual things on our own, but the leadership in the country and the leadership in cities not only has to focus on treating the virus, dealing with people's behaviors or their inability to behave correctly, but also what are the options for individuals that don't have a cool home to stay in during the summer, who don't have an activity-filled day, who don't have an iPad to play on. And I think if we were all focusing on that, rather than focusing on what bars are open we might be in a different place. There was an article, I believe, in the New York Times about we shouldn't be focusing on opening bars and restaurants. We should be focusing on how to open schools safely.
Right. But that's not going to happen. Even colleges that are opening are going to have classes until Thanksgiving, at which point the students will go home and do not come back. Usually the practice is to be, you go home for Thanksgiving, you come back and finish the year. Now, when they go home for Thanksgiving, they are not coming back to the colleges. So it's a truncated school year. And I don't know how they're going to deal with that in terms of academic, covering all this stuff that they have to cover for the year, etc. That's going to be difficult.
It is, and sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
So much about college and teenagers and really any kind of schooling, while online education is fabulous in its own ways, so much of youth development is meeting friends, having those informal conversations, the informal networking that happens personally and professionally, and that has suffered.
That's right. Look at what is happening right now. Teachers are not prepared to do this kind of thing. People are not prepared. Most teachers do not have the skills, the knowledge to teach via the internet.
Well, I think it's hard. I think when there's so much, I know when I was in the classroom, you know this as well, the teacher would ask a question and then have students break off into groups or pairs to discuss it. And that probably is not happening to the degree that it was happening before. And so much learning is organic and not in a Zoom setting. And people feel differently being on camera, especially if you're looking at yourself while speaking. That's something that most people have never traditionally done to the extent that we're now doing it.
Right. Yeah, most of us had never done this. I mean, I have been on television before. I had a program on Telemundo, an interview show. So I'm not unfamiliar with being on camera, but most people haven't.
No, and to be looking at yourself is a weird thing. I mean, it goes to the whole social media culture as well, and self-promotion, that now you feel like you have to look a certain way when you get on camera. And
you look marvelous, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
This is because I don't like summer and I stay out of the sun.
Oh, that's a good reason. Yeah, but so that's one of the problems with education, as you say, also activities. What are they going to do to substitute for the social interaction, which is part of the educational process? So you're not going to have that. You know?
Absolutely. And I think maybe we have to find other ways through walking outside, bike riding, doing things that we wouldn't normally do. I think people, as it gets colder, which I'm excited that I'll get colder, people have to start being able to tolerate the weather outside. I think that is a scary thought, to think of winter in the Northeast without the ability to spend so much time outside, knowing that the virus is spread so much more easily inside.
Well, I have that video that I mentioned. I think Dylan has it. About Paul Harvey saying what sort of a prediction of what was going to happen to our society in the future. And that was 50 years ago. He wrote about this, or he did a video with this. So let's see if Dylan can play for us. Dylan will let us know if he can. Okay. We won't be able to hear it. How long is it? Three minutes. Okay, so you know what we'll do? Dylan, we'll save it for the 3 minutes at the end, and you play it. Okay, that we know. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's better. So I'd rather finish with Karis on this chat. So, so are you happy to be back in the U.S.?
Yeah, I will answer this with I tend to find happiness wherever I am. I haven't explored too much just because of my time spent in Miami. I'm trying to stay away from people. My 2 weeks of self quarantining. There's definitely more freedom here, but I think it goes back to, again, that freedom comes at a cost. In Argentina and Buenos Aires, you technically were not allowed outside to even exercise during the day.
So they had a police check or something?
They didn't have police checks, so to speak, but police were around. It was very common to see, especially my last few days there, because they were starting to roll back their restrictions back to phase 1. I would see 10 to 20 police officers a day. But they didn't stop people in a manner of why are you out. But if I was running in the street or doing squats or sitting in a park, they would definitely ask me what I was doing.
Yeah, well, it's different here, but I guess we still have to be careful about what we do and when we go out. And so you brought masks from Argentina, or you?
I did. I'm glad you brought this up. I leave them on the entrance.
So are they different?
They're all cloth. I mean, that was the thing that I think Argentina being a country where people tend to be entrepreneurs. Right. There was a stand that sold fruit juices that was run by, I believe, a Venezuelan woman, that when I walked past, they were only selling masks. But most people wore cloth masks. Here, I'm amazed of people that are wearing those, I guess they're hospital or doctor grade masks that are disposable.
Well, Karis Painter, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to visit the round table. So you're doing your own show, right?
Yes, on Fridays. And I'm glad you brought this up. For the month of July, so typically I bring in physical movement guests that are involved in dance, yoga, etc. The month of July, I'm bringing in people that use social movements that are volunteers in various capacities. So tune in Friday at 11.
Excellent. We'll look forward to that.
Yes.
And again, thank you very much. And if you go out, wear your Argentine mask.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Señores oyentes de USA la Media, muchas gracias por su sintonía en el día de hoy. Se despide Fernando Méndez, Dylan de Rosato al control y nuestra invitada especial, Karis Painter. Muchas gracias. Los esperamos. Hasta la próxima.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have 1/3 of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions, just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Paul Harvey. Good day.
What do you mean?